Genesis 12 gives us a new start in the story. It's a massively significant moment. It's the moment when the God who called the universe to be makes a second call. It's the moment when the God who said, "Let there be light," then calls a people for himself who will be a light to the world. It's really important as well for Christians because Abraham, according to Paul in Galatians 3 verse 8, Abraham was given the gospel in advance. He was given the gospel in advance. So if we want to understand as Christians what the gospel is, what is the good news that God has given us to communicate to people, we need to know the story of Abraham. We need to be immersed in this story and be able to understand the roots of what we can, of the message that Christians are called to bring to people. And so that's why this story is really important. And Abraham was called for two things. One was to have a faith in God, that he would have this relationship with God, him and Sarah and their descendants would have this relationship with God, and also to be a blessing to all the families of the earth. For me, those things parallel the greatest command, to love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul and strength, and the great commission that Jesus gave at the end of Matthew, which was to go into all the world and make disciples, as in to bring change to this world, to proclaim the gospel, to see lives transformed. And that was the twin calling of the people of God from the very start. From the very start that God said, this mess that is described in Genesis 3 to 11, it needs to be sorted out. And God decides to do it through a bunch of human beings. Not just to intervene and start again, but to do it through Abram and Sarah and their descendants. That they would be people who had this faith in God, this love for God, and then that would in turn then bless the whole world. It wouldn't be just for them to be special and to be chosen and to feel nice about that, but actually it was for them to then bless the entire world through what God did in them and through them. And so that's partly how Abraham got the gospel in advance. But the other thing which is fascinating is this story that often can seem bizarre or offensive to us with our modern reading it with our modern eyes. When Abraham, who was childless, Abraham and Sarah were childless, then God promised them that they would have many descendants, and it would start with a son that he would give to them. And then Isaac was born, and he was the answer, the miraculous answer to those prayers and to that promise. And then Isaac, God calls Abraham to sacrifice Isaac, to kill him as an act of worship. And for us, that's a shocking thing to think about. For Abraham, in the culture he was in, that was not an unusual thing. The idea of giving the gods the thing that is most precious to you was not an unusual thing. And so Abraham obeyed, seemingly without question, it seems from the Bible story. And that story in Genesis 22 gives us an insight into what Jesus was to do on the cross. The gospel in advance. And there are so many aspects to this story. Abraham and Isaac, it's at the start of the story in Genesis 22 verse 5, you get the first mention of the word worship. So, and it's interesting to look at the first mention of important words throughout the rest of the Bible. So the first mention of the word worship involves sacrifice. Abraham says, me and the boy are going to go up the mountain to worship. And so worship from the start of the Bible involves us offering to God that which is most precious to us. And it involves sacrifice and be willing to give anything for God. And so he says, go up and we'll worship. And the fascinating thing that Abraham says here as well is that we will worship and we will come back down. We will return. And it's almost like there's a faith in the resurrection in that moment, that even if Abraham had to go through with the thing that God has told him to do, he still believes that they will come back down again. And so there's this kind of hints of the resurrection as you do that. They go up the mountain, the Father and the Son, together. And I think that's fascinating, because often when we think about the cross, people caricature the story of the cross as an angry father punishing his son and sending his son, and not kind of showing mercy to his son. But actually the Father and the Son go up together in this moment. And the Apostle Paul tells us that when he describes the cross, he says that it was God in Christ reconciling the world to himself. This is something that the Father and the Son do together. And so the Father and the Son go up together, and as they go, the Son carries the wood on his shoulders, the wood for the sacrifice. And obviously instantly then my thoughts go to Jesus carrying the cross to Calvary. And so there's all these parallels here. Then they go up Mount Moriah, and Isaac says to his dad, "Where is the lamb for the sacrifice?" Good question. And Abraham says these incredible words, "The Lord himself will provide the lamb. The Lord himself will provide the lamb." And in that moment, the Jewish tradition has it that mountain, Mount Moriah, is the place where the temple was going to be built. And you can go up that place now, today, onto the Temple Mount. And from the Temple Mount, you can see Calvary, where Jesus was crucified. And I just imagine in my mind Abraham and Isaac standing there, Abraham being given the gospel in advance, and he looks and he can see the place, and he says those words, "The Lord himself will provide the lamb. The Lord himself will provide the lamb." And so you have this incredible coming together of all these big themes that will be played out in the Christian story, in the Christian Bible, and they're all there in the first few chapters of Genesis. That's why Genesis is so important. That's why we're still doing Genesis after 3 sessions of this overview. And so Abraham and Sarah have Isaac. Isaac marries Rebecca, and Isaac and Rebecca together have a son called Jacob. And Jacob marries Rachel, and Jacob changes his name, or God changes Jacob's name, to Israel. And Israel has 12 sons. And the 12 sons of Israel start families themselves. One of them is called Joseph, and lots of us know the story of Joseph. It's a story that you might have seen on film, like The Prince of Egypt, and it's an amazing story. And Joseph gets his coat of many colours, and his brothers are jealous, and then he ends up in Egypt. And God is with Joseph. That's the essence of the Joseph story, that whatever he does, even if he's arrogant, even if he does this and that, God's with him, and God blesses him. And he ends up being a really powerful person in Egypt. And because of that, his family end up living in Egypt. And so the people of Israel, the 12 families of Israel who go to live in Egypt, whilst they're in Egypt, they reproduce quite quickly. And the 12 families of Israel become the 12 tribes of Israel, and they become quite a powerful political threat to the nation of Egypt. And because of that, the Egyptians put them in slavery. And that takes us to the end of Genesis and the start of another call and another new beginning for the people.